In this lesson, we'll be talking about the pull-down menus here at the top of the screen. Files, print, modify, survey spectra, chem state spectra, profiles, overlays, publish, etc. Let's open up Files, Print. We have the ability to import any file using the traditional style. We have the ability to open up the import parameters. We can change to have comments come in with the ID for VAMAS. We can have just binding energy set. We can change the source energy. We can import ISO or save ISO files. So that's what's available when we want to import files. We can save as SDP. We can save as other file formats. We can print, preview it, save and close. Here is a list of all the different files that were recently opened. At the very bottom, if you have a series of files open, you can merge all the open files. You can also delete single spectra one at a time if perhaps you have a spectrum that you don't want to include in the data file. In SDP, I should mention that each data file is stored as a series of spectra, survey, then maybe 4 or 5 high res. If you want, there could also be a valence band. Either your software makes it that way, or you can merge it to have it be that way. It's a convenience factor. Going for another pull-down menu, we have modify. This is meant to modify the raw data. You can either modify it permanently or temporarily. We can do undo, as we talked earlier. Undo allows you to remove any and all processing. You can modify just the y-axis data. We can do divide by, multiply by. We can add counts, or we can subtract. You can also subtract a flat baseline. Back to modify, sample description, display options, font size, peak line colors, info displayed. You can access the derivative mode for Auger, smooth, differentiate, interpolate. You can look at the original experimental parameters. We can actually modify data if you want. You can go in here and modify the counts. Be a little careful with that. That's only useful for spikes. We can also look at our processing history. This is what was done to this particular file. And over time, we can back all those out by using the undo function. Next, we can switch from kinetic energy to binding energy under this modify. We can have a reverse spectrum, as some old instruments used to do. Survey spectra. We can change peak fit tables, change the lookup table. They are different. Find peak sensitivity for with Fmax determines how many peaks you can find. How many points do you want to use to define a baseline to integrate a peak? Charge up, correcting for it. ID peaks, transmission function. Let's bring that up. The equation that's used to modify the transmission function is shown here. You just plug in the number here that you need. One way to take care of differences between your machine and someone else's machine. You can also go to the lookup table. Go to the lookup table. Sorry. Okay. Bring this up. This is the lookup table. It has all the sensitivity factors. If you go to the original ASCII file, you can modify it, put in your exact sensitivity factors that belong to your machine. That's another way to help yourself with putting in correct atom percent values. Chemical state spectra, we can open up the peak fit table, we can view the constraints, we can see the residual, but only in an overlay mode. You can call up the default peak fit parameters. Right now we're set for 80% Gaussian, no asymmetry, 0.01 chi-squared, 1,000 iterations. We've got no nonsense peak capability. The peak has to be higher than 20, otherwise it's not made, and it has to be fatter than 0.5. If you're working on some research data, you might want to change 0.5 to 0.4 or maybe 0.3. Profiles, we can process each of the different capabilities and display them in different ways. Copy to overlay, I showed a little earlier. I'll show that again later. Publish, there's a special lesson for this. Print, export, sample description, fonts and colors. Export, import, we had discussed this briefly at the introduction. You can export the atom percent table, oops. You can export the full atom percent table or just a summary, peak fit table or just a peak fit data. If you want to put it into Igor Pro or put it into Excel or some other data processing software. You can export as the ISO format, and you can also import. We can determine the import filters. We can import peak fits and the peak fit model to be used on the next data set. Model spectra, again, it's a reproduction or redundancy for the import. Tech, we can simply bounce back and forth. We don't use this too often. Preferences, SDP options, we discussed this before. You have all these capabilities to get to, colors, solids, display, printing region, default peak fits, and your import parameters. Okay, we'll discuss all these individually later. That's about it for the pull-down menus and the overview of those pull-down menus. So we'll stop at this point. We'll move to the next lesson. Thank you.